I feel like the last man batting, but since we've already won the match, in terms of the fantastic variety of speakers and content, I don't have much of a role. I'll just block the ball and rush you to dinner. If there's very little to be said after the erudite expostulations by Sheikh Nahan, Al-Mubarak, Anjali's presentation. In fact, seeing the presentation, you felt really proud to be an Indian. I think you brought out so many different aspects of the partnership, the public-private partnership in the new India which is emerging. The stories which you picked up from the health sector, from the nutrition, food sector. Mr. Boutros' presentation, most of us Indians usually suspect that Emirates is an Indian Airlines. And I think today Boutros confirmed it, didn't he? I was itching to ask him this question. I'm surprised none of the Desis asked him, how much of the Emirates bottom line comes from our pockets? Talking about sponsorship, I don't know why is he chasing English football clubs. What he should be sponsoring is 1 year of Bollywood films and the Indian cricket team, because even if it loses matches, it still catches eyeballs. And that question to Boutros on dinner being served at 7:30, why have you called the Dabbawalas here? I think the great idea is that Dabbawalas can reach the dinner which you haven't had on your flight back home in Mumbai at 10 o'clock or 10:30 in the evening. I'll be talking a lot about the Dabbawalas in the course of my brief presentation here. Okay, let me get down to what I really intended to talk about. David Rothkopf has written 2 books. One was The Superclass, in which he talks about 6,000 people, what he calls the superclass, or what you could also call the cognitive elite. These are the Davos men and women who essentially control the world. It could include corporates. You could also, his latest book is Power Inc. So essentially you're talking about a few individuals. Some of the 6,000 are probably in this room, or some are on flights and couldn't make this function today. But that talks about the power of the Indian Institutes of Management or the Indian Institutes of Technology. There was a survey I read in readif.com about 4 or 5 months back, listing the 50 most powerful, most important management gurus. And guess what? 8 of them were from India. And I would imagine out of the 8, 7 would have got their first degree in India, whether in the IIMs or IITs or any of our glorious colleges. The world is changing. You heard of the concept of neuroplasticity, where it was thought years ago that there are some aspects of human behavior so much down in the recesses of the inner brain that you can't think of manipulating them. Well, good news is you can manipulate anything. The world is changing. Our kids sometimes know more than us. It's called reverse mentoring. But let me again get down to the topic. The topic is about nations, emerging nations, and organizations. Essentially means corporates, business leaders, economists. An economist is somebody who, if you forget your telephone number, is going to estimate it for you. Or have you heard of those super econometric models which have predicted 14 of the last 3 recessions? Now, I have the highest respect for economists. I myself have a degree in economics from Bombay University. And I will talk about economics, I will talk about thought leaders, I will talk about business leaders, I will talk about corporate leaders, I will talk about nations. John Kenneth Galbraith in '58, in that fantastic book called The Affluent Society, wrote, "The experience of nations with well-being is exceedingly brief. Nearly all throughout history have been very poor. This is a fact we forget. Because of 24/7 news channels, instant knowledge, etc., we sometimes forget history, the long view of history of from where countries come and where countries are going. If you read Jane Austen, the British writer, and you read her novels, you would imagine that Britain had the highest per capita income in the world, and they were living in a glorious age. But correction, you also have to read Edmund Burke of that period, or you have to read the early books of Charles Dickens to tell you the reality of what UK was then. Just like you can't get the full picture of India by seeing Karan Johar movies, you need to balance it with movies by Dipankar Banerjee or who's that famous director from Karnataka? Shyam Benegal. You need to balance it out. Countries move, countries progress, but countries have three basic tasks to handle. These were identified by Lord Keynes many years ago, but essentially the three tasks which countries need to do are: one is economic efficiency, two, social justice, and three, personal or individual liberty. In this day and age, you can probably add a fourth one, which is the global warming, environmental protection, etc. On global warming, I don't know how many of you would agree, but I've been nursing this theory for years that the globe has been warming since millions of years ago, and there are some countries which are actually benefiting from global warming. Look at Dubai; it's never had 6 months or nearly 6 months of good winter. In India, when we were growing up, every year you read about floods and famines. When was the last time you really had serious floods and famines in India? So the theory here is that sub-countries are actually benefiting from global warming. And I'm backing up with this with a paper by a professor from Pune. And the latest edition of the monthly magazine the Indian Consulate brings out, India Matters, will carry that article. So please nurse this idea that you can take a contrarian position on anything. And on climate change, this is a good contrarian position to hold. Well, why did I talk about countries? And I also talked about economists. The critical year where mankind started believing that the economic destiny or the material existence of mankind is in your own hands was the year 1870. 1870, when the first crop of the British economists, the Scottish economists put their heads together, that was the first time ever that it was felt that life wasn't preordained. The classical debate between free will and determinism of the Greek applied on the economic plank. In 1870 was the year. This is a fairly accurate estimation after the fruits of industrial revolution started coming in and mankind started believing that 9 out of 10 are not doomed to misery. In India, when did this happen? In 1991, when we started liberalizing, we started really believing that the material existence of Indians can change. It is in our own hands. I'm not discounting 1947. What we achieved in 47 was that we finally came to a state where political, social, and economic destinies were largely in our domain to be manipulated. But economics suffered for various historical reasons. This is not the time and place to get into the reasons why the economy didn't do well till 1991. What was in 47? Apparently, in 1947, we had only 13,000 registered manufacturing units in India. But we had a great tradition of entrepreneurship and business people. Marco Polo has commented on the Banyas of Gujarat. You had the Marwaris from Rajasthan who moved from Rajasthan to northern India, eastern India, Central Asia. The Chettiars from Tamil Nadu moving to Burma and Southeast Asia. You had the Multani merchants. You had this great tradition of entrepreneurship, the Shroffs, which financed most of our kings and emperors. The first stock exchange in Asia was under a banyan tree in Mumbai in the 1860s. It was formalized in 1875. And they tell me that the Dabbawalas are about 120 years old. So the first Dabbawala for the Bombay Stock Exchange client was in 1875. So that is about 5 years later. So this was the history. This was the capital we had of entrepreneurs in India. But for the next 47 to 91, because of a mixed agenda, mixed economy, the focus wasn't focused enough. In 91, it changed. Today, you cannot talk about India without talking about its entrepreneurs, about the corporate sector. India's rise is best told through the corporates and the entrepreneurs. Corporate India is more central to our economy than it has ever been. Corporate savings contribute about 25% of our national savings. Corporate income tax is again the largest source of revenue. And there's no telling on what the corporate success does to the esteem of an Indian. You just have to see Indian television to see who are the people who dominate screen space. Is it business leaders like Kamath Saab, cricketers, film stars, and politicians? These four. They capture imagination like nobody else does. So that's what the corporate world is doing for the new resurgent India. Let's talk about the Indian businessmen in Dubai. There was a survey done by Wealth Asset company which ranked cities in the world in number of billionaires they hosted. Dubai was number 18 on that list. Our Mumbai was 5th. First was New York. And why was Dubai 18th on the list? Why was Dubai on the list, you'd imagine? Well, Dubai was on the list because Dubai boasts of 14 Indian billionaires resident in Dubai. 14. So this is the contribution, this is the construct, the Indian construct which has moved out of India into regions in the close neighborhood like the Gulf, Africa, Latin America, America, Europe. And this is a synergy, a historical synergy which today is based on real material mutual advantage. UAE gives us oil, we give them human resource talent. And it's not just workers. I mean, that is history. We are sending the full omnibus of the whole palette of colors available of human talent to this part of the world. And all of you here represent the highest standards, the creme de la creme. So I learned a trick from Robin Sharma. Whenever his lectures sagged a bit, he used to say, please applaud yourself for the success you've achieved. I know my lecture is not sagging. Okay, what are the challenges? What are the challenges the corporate sector, countries, where does this partnership go? This is going to be a challenge. One is the line which national allegiance takes, or the states, the political states follow, and the line corporates follow. Well, there is a synergy, there is a coincidence sometimes, but corporates sometimes work on very different lines. They say these days countries don't compete, companies do. And the multinational companies today, they're so rich, they're so powerful, that if you ranked companies and countries in terms of their turnover, etc., there'd be at least 120 countries which would come after major multinationals in that ranking. But there is a divergence of interests. Has to be, because the objectives are different. So the trick here is to coincide national interests with corporate interests. Sometimes it happens. It happened in Anjali Raina's presentation when she talked about the entrepreneurs in very core, what you'd call core areas of government. For example, in health, you had Dr. Shetty. In food, agriculture, you had the Jain irrigation. And surely there are examples in the education sector. It's because consumer and citizen, the concept is, it's fuddled now. It's become a little fuzzy. Where does the consumer end? Where does the citizen begin? Where does the citizen end? Where does the consumer begin? So corporates will have to take care of their consumers or citizens, because you won't have customers. You won't have consumers if you don't take care of them. The state is receding, remember? We are shrinking. The state responsibilities are shrinking. Nandan Nilekani's example is a great example where the private sector is bringing in its acumen, its expertise, and is leveraging it into a public area. He is trying to produce a public good, a national identity card, which we have struggled for years to put together. So that is one area we'll have to find convergence. Where does the consumer begin? Where does the citizen end? Or either way. For the Indian corporates, I think the lure of the domestic market. Many of our countries are simply enamored, bowled over by the size of the Indian market. We have to move on. We have to move out. Why do we have to move out? Because sometimes Indian companies get caught into a concept or trap of cakeonomics. How many of you have heard the word cakeonomics? Great. Okay. Cakeonomics is a new concept. It is the economics of the worst. It is a low equilibrium. I'll have to read a bit here. It's a low quality payoff. What happens in the general game theorist approach is that everybody is looking for a very positive, high quality outcome. I deliver good services to you, I receive good services to you. But in cakeonomics, what happens is I hope I'm delivering good services and I hope I'm receiving good services, but actually I'm doing the opposite. I'm delivering good services, bad services, I'm receiving bad services. Now, what is the example of this? Why would they do it? Because there's a certain laxity, there's certain laziness involved in this concept. And this typically happens in low-cost economies where you cut corners. Now, the concept of jugaad, which is being thrown around, can actually also go against you if it becomes very pervasive. Now, in this cakeonomic situation, where instead of the general theory of, game theory, where you only look at the high-end positives, let's give you an example. This example was, I read it as applying to Italian labor, but it could apply to Indian labor as well. When you hire the labor, they will promise you the best, the highest form of skills, delivery on time, good finish, etc. But when the work is complete, you'll find it shoddy. Half the time they came late or took long lunch breaks, etc. So the product they deliver is poor. So you pay these laborers much less than what you promised. You also got a good which is much lower than what was promised. The labor will crib, but he'll ultimately accept it. This is the low exchange. Now what happens is that this may work for certain businesses over a period of time, and this is called low equilibrium or low optimality situation. But if you look at it in terms of the larger system, all of this low equilibrium is going to be a cancer for the larger society. So Indian corporates, Indian companies have to move out of this low equilibrium. So that's cakeonomics, economics of the worst. Let me end by quoting Keynes again. Lord Maynard Keynes, if you've read his biography, he had this great love for the arts, culture. I think he married a ballerina as well. And he called the cultural types the trustees of our civilization. And what did he call the business leaders and economists? He didn't call himself the trustees of civilization, but called himself the trustees of the possibility of civilization. That is a very onerous responsibility. And all of you here, in very different ways, have that responsibility of making civilization possible. Dabbawalas, we've been reading a lot about them for the last 15, 20 years. Gora Land have discovered Dabbawalas only about 10 years ago. Dr. Agarwal is going to speak on Dabbawalas. I would have two questions for him. One is, what has the whole business model of Dabbawalas done to the standing of women in our society, in Mumbai in particular, to women's right? I mean, a Dabbawala presumes the wife is there at home and she's going to cook for the husband at 10 o'clock, and it goes. So the Dabbawala is ensuring that the wife stays at home. So he's done a PhD on that. That is what I wanted to know. And the second is, when the Dabba reaches your office at about 12 o'clock, it's also taken back after the contents have been emptied at 2 or 2:30 or 3. What if the Dabba wasn't returned by the Dabbawala home, but by the man who ate the lunch? So is there an opportunity cost here? If the Dabba, you're going home as it is, you can take the tiffin home. So the Dabbawala gets a full day or half day off. He can probably make more money or thinking of a different model, and this guy saves some money because he'll have to pay the Dabbawala half. So two problems for Dr. Agarwal in his speech. And on that note, let me thank the organizers for having me back last year. It's been good fun, and we've been very fortunate to have had the fantastic variety of speakers we had this afternoon, and thank you everybody.